Hi, thanks for tuning into December's weekly stream. This month we'll be kind of just going through the product and we'll be looking at a few things. The thing that we're going to look at this month is really going to be the marketing website reference application that we've got. This is something which you can kind of get going with and explore from a schema point of view, see some dummy content, and obviously browse through the code. It is kind of a one-click solution, so you can create a template with one click. You can clone what we have in the app, and I'll show you that. And you can also kind of one-click deploy this to Vercel or wherever else you need to. So I'll walk you through what that looks like and how you can kind of get going with all that. And then we'll just kind of look around the application and see, what features are in there that you can benefit if you're kind of using GraphCMS for your marketing website. So let's just dive in and let's kind of just get going with this, I think. Let me load up the application. And this is what we've got. We have a website, the application. We have a website reference app in here. If we scroll down, we can see that we've got this. What this is, like I explained, is something that's built in Next.js. It uses GraphCMS to fetch content. And there's kind of a little bit of bonus in there. If you've been using Next.js's preview mode feature, you can just one-click preview something, and Next will put it into kind of this draft mode. So you can view content that maybe you don't want viewable to the world, to the rest of the World Wide Web, but you kind of just want to kind of preview it and see what that would look like. So we'll learn about how we can do that and what that means, and kind of go through all of that terminology. So yeah, let's take a dive in. I'm not going to create a project using this here. It takes a few minutes based on the content we've got to clone it across. So before I dived onto the stream, I just did that ahead of time. So I've just given mine a name, Jamie's Marketing Website Demo. Very, very creative. And obviously a few things are checked on here. Most of these are checked because you're cloning from a template. These have been done. So I'm going to walk you through it. If you have just created a new project with GraphCMS and you're kind of keen to explore working with a front-end stack that you're familiar with, maybe you're not familiar with using GraphCMS or GraphQL, but you kind of just want to get going with your own stack, we've got some guides in here that will walk you through doing so. So in here, you can see we've pre-filled in some of the queries you can run and the libraries to instantiate all of these things as well. So if you're working with Gatsby, obviously you can use Gatsby as well. And there's a source plugin there. We walk through how to get going with that. And if you're using Next.4, there's a tag to do that as well. Nuxt, Svelte, and our Management SDK. Management SDK allows you to programmatically change things throughout the schema, which is really, really cool. So just checking a few things out here. Yep, there we go. So yeah, let's just maybe take a tour around the schema view. I'll kind of zoom in and out where it's appropriate, and we'll kind of have a look through everything that's here. So if you're new to GraphCMS for the very first time and you're familiar with GraphQL, what this schema editor designer allows you to do is create all of the types and add all of the different kind of fields or the scalar types to that GraphQL schema. And as a content editor, you kind of get different views for all of that. So if you add a string, you'll get an input for a string. If you add multi-line, you'll get a text area. If you add a slug, it'll kind of be pre-populated with things and can be pre-populated with whatever you configure. Rich text, obviously, we give you some things for rich text as well. Number, you get number inputs. And, if it's a float, you get inputs for that. If it's a Boolean, we'll render a checkbox. All of that usual behavior you'd expect from a CMS. We provide that on top of your GraphQL schema. You can just use GraphCMS, though, as an API. You don't even have to use the editing UI if you don't want to. There's tons of people doing this. I have a few applications of myself where I don't need the interface. I have an API. I maybe just design the UI design the schema in the UI, or I use the management SDK. And then after that, I just use the API to manage content. So whatever your kind of programmatic content needs are, we got you covered. But when you are designing a schema, what you'll kind of find on the left here is you get the ability to add new models. You give your model a name, which is displayed to you as a content user. And then you get the API ID and the plural API ID. And you can add a description and so much more. This is what's kind of sent to the schema. So when you are introspecting your GraphQL schema with GraphCMS, you will be able to see what that name is. And if you add a description, that will also show in there. Preview modes is something which we'll go through today as well, very briefly. I'll show you how that's set up as well. We'll go into a model that's already kind of got that configured, and I'll show you how that works. And then, yeah, what else have we got? We've got some a blog post model, and then inside of here, you can see we've got some fields, and these are kind of pre-populated and stuff. So I'm going to kind of browse around the whole thing, and then we'll dive in specifically in one area, and that should be kind of enough for the stream for today. But if you're new to GraphCMS, feel free to get started, as I say, using this marketing project. Create a new project, you clone all of the models and schema that we have, so you haven't got to worry about setting all of that up. And then it might just be easy for you to kind of go through and figure out, with everything done retrospectively, see how it was done and how it's configured with all of the models and GraphQL union types and stuff. So we'll cover some of that today. Go back and watch the previous product streams, and you can kind of dive into those specific areas that you need. But yeah, let's just kind of start looking around this and see what we have. So the blog post is, if we open this, has those, obviously the display name populated, the API ID populated, and then we've got some preview URLs populated as well. And I'm going to show you what this allows you to do. But essentially what you can do is you can set links to view content externally. Here we're just calling them preview URLs, but these can be links to wherever you want. And what we're doing with Next.js specifically in this demo is we are triggering their preview mode, which is just setting a cookie, and we're sending along some data for it to kind of figure out, okay, where do I redirect to when I trigger into the preview mode and stuff. So all of these different models here might not make a lot of sense right now. I will show you where they make sense and as we kind of progress throughout this video. But we also kind of give you the ability to add enumerations as well. Quite a lot of CMSs that are GraphQL based, well, they don't kind of give you that option. We do. We give you the ability to add enums to your GraphQL schema. So if you're familiar with GraphQL, you'll probably feel right at home with all of this as well. So let's just maybe dive into, well, look, we've got a blog post here. It has some hidden fields as well, which is kind of all managed by the system. And then we've got some fields in here of all these different types that we can add. So down here, we've got content, which is a string. It's marked down and localized, and it's required. So why don't we switch over to editing content? And if you zoom in on the top right here, we can just dive straight into editing content. So this takes me over to the model in the content editor's view, and we can see everything that's going on. Everything that is a draft or a published stage, or if you're working with multiple content stages, that will kind of show in this column here. You might be working with various, such as QA or wherever. That will show in the column, so you kind of get a good idea as a content editor how this works and how this looks. So this is something, if you're just a content editor using GraphCMS, this is going to feel very familiar, and moving around and working with this will get, you'll pick that up in no time as you use this. There's various different things depending on whether, if you have any localized documents, you can filter on those, you can switch between those. Here I'm fetching documents with 2 locales or more, and then we can do some basic filters in here as well. I could filter where something was created at greater than today or yesterday or a specific day and time, and published, and all of the other filters in there. And we kind of give you the tools to do that. Then when you're happy with those filters, you can create a custom view, and you can save that, and that will appear inside of the left-hand side here. So let's just set a date. We'll choose today. It's very specific because we've specified is, but we could say less than today, which would obviously show everything because this content's been created beforehand. So if we go ahead and save this, I'm not going to give it a real name, but let's just call it December updates or something. You could change that filter to filter content titles, whether they start with a certain string or something. However you're categorizing your content, you've got the option to do that. So I've saved a custom view. So in a week's time, when I come back and I don't have to kind of reapply all of these filters, I can just click on that custom view, and immediately I see the content in that state where all of those views were, what that looked like at that time. Now, one other thing is, if you go, oh, well, okay, well, let's say we go into blog posts, we clear out this filter, Maybe as we configure some columns, and maybe as we don't want to display the ID or the created ad or who created, when it was updated, and all of this stuff. This might not be too important. Maybe you just want the title and the slug, whether it's published or not. And yeah, maybe that's what you want to be the default. Well, instead of just showing all of those fields and having to filter all of those every single time, and of course you can change the order of these as well. So the slug comes first. What you could actually do is you could just say, okay, update the default view, and then this will update the default view for everybody in the project. So when they next come in to view your blog posts, they don't have to configure all those columns, move them around, and make them work the way you want. You can just save these, and those will be available to everyone, which is really cool. I'm not going to save that because I'm not sure if I want to keep this layout, so we'll just disregard that and move on. But what I'm going to kind of go into here is we're going to open something that's published. So here we've got a content entry that is published, and you can now see, well, in the schema, we had that title field, and then we had a cover image. And a cover image is an asset, which is kind of a first-class citizen inside of GraphCMS. We treat that as its own entity. You can query for all of your assets, or an asset by ID or a filter. But we kind of linked it here as a relationship, and I'll walk through that in a little bit, in a little while. So as I was kind of talking about before, with what fields you add and the different scalar types, those render different content inputs and things. This is exactly what you see as a content editor. On the right, I've got some information about when it was published, who last updated, and I have that preview link, which we'll talk about next. And then I've kind of got the different content stages in which this lives. And then, if this document is localized, I can then click on the little icon to show or hide the localized content for this document. And if I don't like it, well, I can just delete it and get rid of that localized entry. But we won't do that just yet. We want to keep those because we want to see what this looks like on the front end. So here we've got a relation to authors. So we can change the order of this if we really wanted to, and add more things. We can create something. This will then pop out, this drawer to create a new author, a new person that's related to this document. And down we've got kind of things like a slug, the excerpt, and then now we get to things like a date scalar type here, where if we click on this here, this kind of renders this UI to pick a date. And then same for SEO, we can edit the nested content entry for this. We've got various things, different renderer types. So here we've said keywords accepts an array. We can reorder those arrays. We can remove them, clean them up, clear it all, set it to null, do whatever you need to do. You can do that and kind of nest the documents from this main screen. Then the fun stuff, we scroll on down, and then now we've kind of got that markdown box. So everything in here is markdown. If I click bold, there we go. We got the markdown formatting of this. Make it italic, we get that format as well shown to us. Now we do have a rich text version as well, and probably in January's stream, we walk through working with rich text alone, and we'll spend a full kind of 30, 45 minutes going through the rich text and rendering that rich text on the front end, which is going to be really cool. But this is Markdown. And if anyone's following along that is not familiar with Markdown, just Google it. You can learn about what the syntax looks like. It's very, very developer-centric, but it's also pretty cool to use as well. And with rich text, it confines itself and it binds itself to a specific AST. If you move around different rich text editors of different CMSs, the AST may differ. So important in moving content around those or working with content that can be used elsewhere, you kind of bind yourself to kind of a particular AST. It can kind of get a bit cumbersome to work with. So with Markdown, it's quite generic. It's a standard. It's like a spec like GraphQL, you could say. There's a specific formatting of it and different flavors, obviously, of it, but you can move it around and use it in pretty much the same way and expect it to work wherever. So pretty cool. And we just kind of give you this renderer here. You can expand the box to see a bit more. It's not important. You can obviously collapse that field as well. Then these are the enumerations that we've got in the CMS. We've got announcement and guide as two enumerations. And then from here, we can pick what those are, and we can save it. If I clear that out and try to save the document, it's default to guide, so that's okay. But if you added something that maybe was required that didn't have a default, here we're going to get an error. Please enter a value. So you can customize those errors as well. You can specify different validations on there, different parameters in which something should be required. Enter something more than 10 characters long, for example, or whether something like an integer should be greater than a certain int, then you can configure all of that as well in the CMS. So if you wanted to do that, that's over when you're designing the schema. If we go back to blog post, so we're talking, we're following the same thing here. If we go to title, this is required. There's a few things on here which I've taught in different streams. So if you're interested in all of the different settings here, go back and view one of those. We won't spend time today going over it, but just be aware there's different kind of configurations. So you'll feel right at home on whatever you need to do. So as you'd expect with most things, where there's validations required, you can specify what can be entered into those fields, and those translate to the API as well. So if you're using a mutation to enter a new entry and something doesn't meet a validation, then you will get an error back, which is cool. So you can specify all of this fun stuff in here. If something's unique, maybe it's a username, maybe it's a slug for a page, we'll validate that as well for you. Obviously you can restrict and match certain regexes as well. That's all in there as well. Now, if you had a field that you just wanted to use in the API, well, you could just specify that this is API only in the field visibility. So you can set fields to be read only, read and write, hidden, or API only. I use the API only quite a bit. It's quite useful if you're storing kind of metadata about objects and you don't want content editors to get in with that content. Set it to API only, and that works. Now, so we've got our blog post model, right? And I want to dive back into the preview mode because that's quite interesting. Here we've got kind of a link to a website, and then we've specified a secret, which this could be anything, as long as the front end knows, that's fine. And then we've got a slug, and this slug is kind of the current document slug. So you can see above here the different fields that we have available. For view all, you can see we've got the slug there and various other things. So I'm going to dive into a blog post now, and we'll switch over to content editing. And maybe as we go to this draft here. Now we'll switch over to the front end. So we'll see here we've got marketing promotions on this site. This is a blog post, right? This is the front end for that project template that you've seen. And if we scroll down, we can see we've got various things on here. We've got a hero. We've got this bar in here, logo, cloud, or whatever it's called in the components. Then we've got kind of the grid here that has different columns and different orientations. And then we've got kind of something here, which is a component itself. And I'll show you this in the CMS in just a second. And then we've got kind of a call out here, and we've got FAQs. And then we've got newsletters and footer and whatever else. And now, if we imagine the whole page here, it's kind of in our minds, if you can visualize it in a block format, we've got a page that has blocks, and that's built up of different kind of components, and we want a way to kind of control that. And that's what we'll have a look in next on the video, is how we can kind of build this page and reorder those blocks even. But we were inside of the CMS, and we were inside of this blog post, marketing promotions on this page. Now, if we go to the top, we can see we have a blog, and this is all open source. We're just querying content from the blog here. Now, hopefully that's not published. It's not. We've got 4 articles in here that are published. And we've got something in here, marketing promotions on this site. It isn't published, but it's in a draft state. I don't want my entire team to know about this just yet, but I want to kind of give a link to someone to go and preview this content. So right now you can open and preview here, or if you right click, and we should probably add a button in the UI to make this easier. But if you copied that link address, you could then share that link address with other people. But for now, if you just click on open and preview, that will then kick the it'll kick over to the website. It opens it in this preview mode, And then you can see at the top, we've got this banner. Now, the reference application takes care of rendering things like the banner and using the correct API keys. The note on how to do this is in the README, and I'll go over that at the end. But now we've got this page for a blog post that is not published on the site. This is in draft state, and this is in the draft state in GraphCMS. Now, if I go in here and just update some content and say hello world, and we save that, now if we go back to the page, you'll see we have test there. If we refresh, and this will take a few seconds while it kind of rebuilds itself. This isn't happening on a server request. There's a little bit of delay there while the page rebuilds. Now we have that content test, hello world. And we haven't done anything. We haven't clicked deploy. This happened in a matter of seconds where that content was updated. And if we change the title of the page, obviously the same will apply there. So yeah, let's refresh that, and that'll take again a few seconds. It may be 5 or 10 seconds. I can't remember. But the Next.js will just rebuild this page, and it kind of caches it, and then we can kind of go about editing and previewing that content. So that'll take a few seconds. I'm not going to keep clicking refresh, but there we go. We've got that new title on the page now, which is kind of in draft state. If I exit the preview mode and we go back to the blog, that post is no longer there. If I try and go back to it, it's not going to allow me unless I knew the URL. So there we go. I go back to that page. It's a 404. I'm no longer in that preview mode. And that's something that is, we've configured with GraphCMS. We've set kind of a shortcut on where to go. We're going to something that kicks in a specific mode on a framework, and Next.js in this example uses the preview mode. And we use that extensively to kind of swap out the content and the API keys. So that's pretty cool. If you're curious to learn more about how that works, there's an article on the blog I think I wrote that shows you how to do that. And we've got a dedicated video on it as well. But any questions about that, let me know. We've got about 8 minutes left, so I just kind of want to go through the rest of the CMS and maybe this example project. And I was talking before about a page consisting of blocks and you controlling those. So if we go to the content editor here, and on the left we have a model called page. Inside of here we've now got some different pages. So you'll notice that we have this slug called home. This isn't the index route here, but it kind of is. This could maybe be better named index or something, but that's the index page for the site. And then we kind of add a title in here, and we've got some content. So again, preview mode works in the exact same way for this page. If we edited, if we updated the title here and we go back, let's just change this here. That title is what is shown inside of this box here. If I save that though, and I refresh a few times, that's not going to do anything. That will not be updated because I haven't published it. And this is GraphCMS's content stages. By default, everything belongs in the content stage. If I wanted to preview that, I could click preview. That would then take me over to preview mode, and I could see those changes in kind of a preview environment. You could alternatively set the preview environment up on a staging domain. So if you went to staging.graphcms.com or whatever that marketing website URL was, you could say, okay, just read from the content stage when you're in this kind of staging environment, which is really cool. But yeah, let's scroll down to those blocks we were talking about. We've got blocks in here, which we can reorder everything. We can change the order of this page however we want. And if we just copy that there so we can kind of see, we go here, we've got this block here. So this purple thing, that's a block, that's a component, right? And we can control the page, the layout of the page, and then we can, we could go further by changing maybe the color or the theme of that. We don't have that in here, but you could add in a field to say, okay, well, this is a purple background here, but maybe I want red or green or pink or whatever. You could specify in the CMS a color field, and then you could specify the color as a content editor, and that could then be reflected on the front end, which is really cool. So you've got kind of that flexibility in there as well. So yeah, that's kind of the blocks. Now, these blocks are of different types. This is what we call a GraphQL union type or polymorphic relation. And you can learn more about those again on our blog or in our docs. And we've got a dedicated video on GraphQL union types. And you can learn about how those work. But if we switch over to another entry here, if we go to the grid, for example, and we have a look at this, what we've done is we've kind of set some fields in here that kind of map over to programmatic values or enums or something. So here we have a theme called white, a value white for the enum theme. Then we've got light and dark. Now the value in here was white, right, for the page index. So down here we've got kind of this white theme. Background's white, I guess. And that, if we change that to dark, the colors would invert. And then we can use variables in CSS or in our JavaScript to say, okay, if that enum theme is dark, then I know the text needs to be a lot lighter. And you can kind of revert and invert and do what you need to do, moving those values around with those enums. Then again, we've got width as well. Well, how does that work? Well, here we've got this, then we've got that, and then we've got the third column in here. So you can kind of change the layout of all of this, which is really, really cool. Again, stack or split. Again, enums are used for programmatic effect. They aren't used for content values. The stack and split tell the CSS how to adjust the layout. And that's how we're using the CMS to control all of that. A few of the specific ones here with component is we have stat section. This is just telling the front end what component to render. You may or may not need this kind of level of complexity, but the code for all of this is on GitHub to kind of see how that works. But we're not diving deep into this specifically this week. We've got videos on this if you're kind of keen to learn a bit more about that. Then we've got various columns inside of there, and many other things. So I'm not going to dive too deep into all of that. The purpose of the stream is just to kind of walk through and talk through various features in the application, and whatever kind of gets your attention, feel free to ask us any questions you've got, and we can kind of go further on it. So we've got tons of different models here that do tons of different things. We've got a footer model as well. If we open that, we've got one entry because we've got one footer, but you could specify maybe it's a certain page on your website doesn't have a header or doesn't have a footer. I know some of those annoying marketing pages that you click through to just have the content in a form to capture details. You can build that same experience inside of GraphCMS using this kind of approach where you can specify a footer or a header that belongs to a page parent model, if that makes sense. And then you could specify in the footer or the header what links you want, what links are primary, secondary, etc. And then down here, we've got relations to pages where that footer belongs to. So that's cool. So yeah, I don't want to kind of dive too much into this specific example, but it's kind of something that you can get started with today and get going with. And all the content, all the schema examples are there for you to kind of try out and see how it's connected. Any questions, let us know. But let's just dive on through the rest of the application now as we kind of wrap up for 30 minutes. So here we've got an asset management thing, and this works in the same way as editing regular content. I mentioned assets were first-class citizens, so an asset is a content entry, and you can filter all of these, you can set those views, you can upload, you can extend the model as well. So here we have a logo for the Chakra UI framework. You can add additional fields in here. Maybe you wanted to add a title field for it, or maybe you wanted to add a caption or an author or whoever, whatever. You can configure all of that inside of here as well. And obviously, you've got the ability to kind of publish, unpublish, delete, and schedule, and many other things. We've got a whole video on scheduling as well. We'll not go into it in this video, but if you wanted to kind of schedule content to be published or unpublished at a certain time or day, you can do all of that as well. Then we've got the API playground. Inside of here, if I made a query, and these are the same queries that you would make on the front end inside of your front end framework. And if you're not familiar with the front end framework, we've got those guides as well. So ID, we can query here for those. So let's just get all of our pages. Here we've got the home page, the about page, the blog, product page, feature page, pricing page, ready to dive, whatever that is. We've got everything in here as well. So this is the content you would use to build that front end. And we've got so much in here. If I wanted to create a new page, I mentioned this at the very beginning. If you didn't want to use the GraphCMS UI at all for whatever reason. Maybe you were programmatically inserting content, such as a blog has comments. Well, you can do that in here. If you had a model called comment, we would automatically create a mutation called comment. We don't in this example, but let's assume it's called comment here. We'll replace page with comment, and we can add the data for our page. So we add title, and we'll say hello. If we try and run this, we'll get validation errors. So this is a good exercise, and then we'll return the ID and title. We'll hit that mutation, and boom, we get an error that the slug was not not given. Maybe this error could be a little bit nicer, but that's telling us, hey, that field is required. So if you're creating content, updating content, deleting content, upserting content, publishing content, you can do everything you can in the UI through one of our APIs as well, or the SDK. Lastly, second to last, we've got webhooks. Here you can define something that triggers some external business logic when something happens with your data. So you may publish something and you want to notify everybody on Slack. Hey, we've got a new blog post, send this to the main announcements channel. You can do all of that automatically through webhooks. And you can fine tune these. So you can say, well, only when it's a blog post, or only when it's a page, or maybe I want to tell everyone when the footer updates. Well, you can specify in there that one of the triggers is, hey, only watch for the footer page, and it will do that, which is really cool. You set a URL for where you want the content to go, and then you can secure it if you wanted to with a key. And yeah, you can add some headers if you want to. So lastly, we've got the project settings. Here you can learn more about your project, its ID. You can upload a photo if you've got many photos to easily distinguish between them. We've got environments, which we haven't touched on, but we do have a blog article showing you how to work with environments. But you can create a new environment for your schema, and you can create changes. So you could have a website that's in production, or a mobile app, or whatever it be. You could have something in production that has a master or main schema, and you can clone that, you make some changes, and those changes obviously will not impact the production. And we've got a blog article, we've got a video, and everything on that as well. Integrations, if you're deploying to one of these providers, you can use those to deploy in automatically if you wanted to. We've got other things as well, like content stages. You can configure those in there, locales, all of those go in there. So we've got content on all of these different things and what they mean. And we've got a new guide coming for UI extensions soon as well. And that will walk you through how to create a UI extension. So all of those kind of UI inputs that I showed you before, if you don't like those, you can get rid of them. You can implement your own, and you can do that with UI extensions. So we've got something coming around soon with that. So much more that we haven't covered is roles and permissions and team members. So in here, my plan doesn't permit it, but if I did have a plan, I could create a new role, and I could say this person can only edit content, and you can specify who belongs to what role. So when they log in, they might not be able to make any changes to your schema, but they can edit content because they don't have kind of that admin access or developer access. They may only be a contributor, and you can lock it down further and say this person can only create content or only publish content in a certain locale, which is really cool. So we got a lot of articles and things on that, but the purpose and the point of this live stream, really, these office hours, is just to kind of poke around the application and see what it's fun, and then you can ask us questions about that later, and we can do dedicated videos and tutorials on that. So if you've seen anything today that is interesting, please let me know. Please let me know if you've got any questions as well. And as I say, to get started with this example, open the application and click on the template marketing website. In here, you will find links to the live demo, the GitHub repository, and how you can deploy your own. And if you go to the README here, there's a button in here to deploy this to the cell. And you click on that, you give it your API keys, you give it your endpoint, and away you go. Everything else is pretty much done. So it's a one-click thing. If you want to enable the Next.js preview mode that I walked you through, well, we've got instructions in the README on how you can configure that. That took me all of 30 seconds to set up, which is pretty cool. yeah, so there we go. We've got a repo that you can use and reference for building your marketing websites. And this uses GraphQL union types mainly under the hood. So you can kind of learn about how we build all of these different blocks and how we render those blocks as well. So go check out all of these resources if that is of any interest. And if you're creating something that you want to kind of contribute to this, let us know. Go to graphcms.com/community. You can find out about what everybody is doing within the community there, and links to other fun projects and starters that people have created as well. So if you're working on something that you think we should know about, or you'd just love to kind of get feedback from the community, then please go over there and you can let us all know as well. So that is going to be it for this week, or this month rather. And we'll get back into things in January. So yeah, any questions, let me know and head on over to the community, and please head on over to slack.graphcms.com where you can get involved with the rest of the community there. So until next time, thank you and see you then.